once in a while, it's nice to be given a very easy job. Today I was asked to introduce someone who needs no introduction at all, Mr. Rather, so we are just very thankful for your willingness to come here to speak with us, and on behalf of Harvard, the Kennedy School, and the Center for Public Leadership, thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
Now that said, a lot of you are probably wondering, who the heck is this guy? Maybe I should take a second to just introduce myself. As Jen said, I was a Zuckerman Fellow last year. And this summer I had 2 job offers. One was to work for a hedge fund, and one was to go to Afghanistan to be a reporter for Dan Rather. So that was a very easy decision. I know Dan because he interviewed me regarding some of my work when I was a special assistant for General Petraeus in Iraq in 2007 and 2008. I was on the show. The producer had this idea of sending me over and trying me out as a journalist, and it was a fantastic experience. So that's how we got to know each other. And I think right now I'd really just like to get right into the discussion.
Let's do it.
I'm gonna ask a few questions to start us off, and then what we really want to do is hear from you. So as it starts off and as the discussion progresses, please be thinking of questions that you can ask a little later on. So just to start off, I'll say that when I told my mother that I was going to go to Afghanistan this summer, about a week and a half before I left, she said, well, first of all, she wouldn't speak to me for a week. After my sister brokered a peace agreement between us, I said to her, don't worry, this is nothing like the job I had in Iraq. I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going with Dan Rather. They're not going to let anything happen to him. Everything will be safe. And my mother said, "Oh, you mean Gunga Dan?" That comes from Vietnam.
No, that actually comes from Afghanistan.
It comes from Afghanistan. Can you explain to us for a little bit younger?
I'll be happy to. But let me say a few things before. I will answer the question. It did not come from Vietnam. I was in Vietnam for almost a year in 1965 and 66. And I was back another 4 times after that. But I'll answer the answer. But number one, I'm happy to be here, and I'm honored to be here, and humbled to be here. Number two, in the introduction to himself, we said he is a former Marine. I hope you recognize that there are no former Marines. They're Marines, period. Nobody ever leaves the Corps. I say that as a one-time enlisted man in the Marine Corps. Seth was an officer, which is one of the highest honors that our country can bestow. I have one of the shortest and least distinguished records in the whole history. I just want to make that point because, particularly for aspiring journalists, one should never be introduced as a former Marine. Number two, and I'll keep this as short as I can, but I came with a short list of things I wanted to make sure that I got done. And if I don't do them right, I haven't forgotten the question. So, that I am genuinely honored and humbled to be here, as I always am. Harvard is one of the great institutions of wisdom, knowledge, and teaching, not only in Western civilization, but in the world. And if I can be so presumptuous, I will ask a question, which I don't expect you to answer except in your own mind, which is, do you have any idea how lucky and privileged you are to be here today? And I would recommend to you that in mind. Number two, it's not in me, it's never in me to appear before any gathering of more than 2 or 3 people and not ask for at least for a moment to keep in mind the tremendous sacrifices that people such as Seth, you perhaps know his record in Iraq, he once actually worked for a living before going to Afghanistan, goof off for us, posing as a journalist. But, I'd like to take just a moment for us to think about all of those young men and women who are sacrificing the country. So with that done, now to Gunga Dan. And not my favorite description of myself. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan around Christmas time in 1979. They had been making an effort to occupy and take over the country through what you might call soft power, diplomacy, that kind of thing. It was falling apart, and so they invaded the country, a full military invasion, with the purpose of occupying the country and making it one of the Soviet satellites. I tried to go immediately. I don't always recognize a big story, but you couldn't be much of a journalist and not recognize that was a good story. But it was dead of winter in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is so mountainous, mountain passes get crowded with snow. We weren't able to go until March. And in March of 1980, with a CBS News crew and a wonderful woman from Harvard named Aidan Navy, who was our translator. She's American, but was a heritage in the region, and spoke Pashto and Farsi. We walked into Afghanistan from Pakistan, now known as the territories. We walked through the Khyber Pass, and we walked in, and we were there for, I think, 18 days, and we walked out. And when I came out, this is not a complaint, there were a fair number of newspaper articles that said, one, did they really go in? Did they just use a television set somewhere in Pakistan to pose that they went? And Time magazine said, well, it's no big deal, you know, Rather's a television Hollywood kind of guy. And he went in with a $35 haircut, which was considered extreme in those days, so that he wanted to go expensive. And the Washington Post wrote a story, and they dumped it down. So that's where that came